Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. Story 1. She walks with twisted feet.
Every family has its secrets, stories whispered in hushed tones, never spoken of in the bright light of day. My family carries such a tale, passed down through generations, the story of my great-grandfather and the churail. Do you know what a churail is? In some stories, she is a witch, but in most she is a woman who died during pregnancy or childbirth, returning from the grave, seeking vengeance. If her husband was responsible for her suffering, she will return to take her revenge, not just on him, but on any man she encounters. In older traditions, such women were buried face down, their eyes forced to gaze only at the earth. Without sight of the living world, they could not rise from their graves. But if the proper rituals were not performed, they would return. This is what happened to my great-grandfather. He and my great-grandmother lived near a secluded railway town in Bihar, India, their home bordering an overgrown path that led to an old unmarked graveyard. Villagers rarely used it, fearing what might linger there. Shortly after their marriage, my great-grandmother became pregnant. My great-grandfather, devoted and loving, took every precaution to protect her, but despite his efforts, something sinister found its way into their lives. One night, my great-grandmother saw a woman walking outside their home, her silhouette framed by the dim moonlight. The next morning, she found strange footprints in the dirt, human yet eerily wrong, as if the feet were reversed. Fear gripped her heart. That night, she stayed awake. When she peeked into her husband's room, she saw a horrifying sight, a beautiful woman, pale and otherworldly, sitting atop him, her long tangled hair shrouding her face. But what sent chills down her spine were her feet, twisted, facing the wrong direction. A churail. Knowing the danger, she sought guidance from the village elders. They confirmed her fears. A woman had died recently in childbirth and had not received the proper rites. Armed with mustard seeds, iron nails, and hibiscus plants, she returned to confront the entity. She scattered mustard seeds over the grave, forcing the churail to count them, a task that would keep her from harming others. She drove iron nails into the corners of the grave and their home's threshold, sealing the spirit away. A ritual fire was lit, prayers were whispered, and holy water from the river Ganges was sprinkled throughout their home. For days, my great-grandfather lay weak, his body drained by the creature's touch, but slowly he recovered. My great-grandmother had won. Years later, she told this story, ensuring that each generation knew how to recognize a churail. Always check the feet. They will tell you if the beautiful woman before you is truly human. Sometimes I wonder, is he still waiting for me?
Story 2. Astral projection gone horribly wrong.
As a child, I had a secret, a terrifying ability I never told anyone. I could leave my body while I slept. My parents often wondered how I knew things I had no way of knowing, but they dismissed it as lucky guesses. If only they knew the truth. I discovered it accidentally one night when I fell asleep on my back, hand resting on my chest. As soon as I drifted off, I felt a strange weightlessness. Suddenly, I was hovering above my own sleeping body. I could see everything, my rising and falling chest, my transparent hands. It felt too real to be a dream. Curious, I floated through my bedroom wall and into the night. I could fly fast. The world blurred beneath me as I soared over houses and trees. I visited my best friend's house, watching her sleep before drifting into the backyard where her brother worked on a motorbike. The next day when I mentioned it, my friend was shocked. No one outside their family knew about the bike. Night after night, I explored further. I touched strangers' shoulders, some turned around as if they felt me, others did not. Animals, however, always noticed. Dogs barked, cats hissed. But humans, they never saw me, until one night someone did. I had flown far beyond my town, beyond my country. I found myself in an old European village, its narrow cobblestone streets lined with ancient buildings. I wandered into a dimly lit winery where a man sat in an office, writing in a large ledger. His walls were covered in maps, one of which caught my eye. As I studied it, I felt something unnerving, a presence. I turned, and the man was staring directly at me. Panic surged through me. He saw me, not like the dogs, not like the cats. He truly saw me. His eyes locked onto mine, dark and knowing. Before he could speak, I fled, flying faster than ever, escaping back into my body. I never returned. Fear replaced my excitement. What if he could hold me there? What if I never woke up? As I grew older, my ability faded, but I still dream of that village, the winery, and the man with those watching eyes.
Story 3. The Crying Spirit's Curse.
Houses can be haunted, places can be haunted, and even objects can be haunted. But today, I am here to tell you that people can be haunted too. This is a story of my childhood friend. We grew up together, and for as long as I could remember, she had an unusual fear of mirrors. One day I asked her why, and she told me this terrifying story. Do you notice how I have no mirrors in my house? There is a reason for that. I have been haunted. A spirit tormented me as a child, and it used mirrors to do so. To this day, looking into a reflection makes me uneasy. It began when I was young, staying at my family's farm. One night I awoke to the sound of a woman crying outside. Everyone else was asleep, yet the sorrowful wails continued. I stepped outside, guided only by moonlight, but as I moved closer, the crying seemed to drift further away. Frightened, I ran back inside. The sobs continued for nearly an hour before fading into silence. The next day, a woman came to our farm, asking if a child had been wandering outside at night. My brother assured her that no one had, but when I stepped forward, she smiled at me, then turned and walked away without another word. My brother asked if I had seen her the night before, but I only recalled hearing the crying. Later, I found a small compact mirror in the dirt where the woman had stood. I kept it, unaware of its sinister connection. When my aunt heard about the encounter, she grew pale. She told us of a spirit. Some called her a witch, others a restless apparition, known for luring children away in the night. Villagers believed she had been caught practicing dark rituals long ago, and although her life was taken, her presence remained. That night I woke up parched and went to get water. As I stood in the dim kitchen, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching, then stopping right beside me. Yet I was alone. I felt an overwhelming chill before the footsteps retreated. Checking on my family, I found everyone fast asleep. Shaken, I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. When I looked up, I screamed. Staring back from the mirror was the woman from the farm, but now her face was slashed and twisted into an eerie grin. My family rushed in, but when I tried to explain, they dismissed it as my imagination. It did not stop there. Shadows lurked in mirrors. Footsteps followed me. At times, a faint, chilling laughter echoed in empty rooms. My fear consumed me. I only dared to use the small compact mirror I had found. Somehow, she never appeared in it. One day, while playing on the roof, I accidentally dropped the compact. It shattered upon impact. At that very moment, I saw her. She was floating, watching. Her body faded below her chest, and her sorrowful eyes locked onto mine. I screamed for my brother, but before he could look, she drifted behind a wall and vanished. After that day, she never appeared again. My fear of mirrors remained, but her presence was gone. This was the story my friend told me. Years later, I asked if she still feared mirrors. She smiled and said, "Not anymore." She never came back after the compact mirror broke. But sometimes, she admitted, when she looks into a reflection too long, she wonders what if one day the woman is staring back again.
Story 4. Traded to the darkness.
If you ever asked me if I believed in God, my answer would be yes, with all my heart. Some may argue that prayers go unheard, but I have proof that they do. This story is not just a tale, it is a horrifying truth I witnessed firsthand. My friend's sister passed away during childbirth, leaving behind a fragile baby boy named Amit. Tragedy deepened when Amit's father vanished one night, abandoning his son. My friend's family raised him with love, and his grandfather in particular adored him. Amit was the light of his life. As Amit grew, his laughter filled their small shop in Patna, Bihar. But soon strange things began happening. Amit would wake up screaming in terror, claiming that shadows with hollow eyes watched him from the corners of his room. My friend's father would check every nook and reassure him that there were no monsters, but Amit insisted they whispered to him at night. Then the sickness came. It started with headaches and stomach pain, then fevers that would not break. Amit would recover briefly, only to fall ill again, each time worse than before. Soon he became too weak to move, his body wasting away. One night, Amit whispered in a trembling voice, "Grandpa, they are taking me. They say it is my time." Panic spread through the family. Amit was rushed to the hospital where doctors found no explanation for his deteriorating condition. He convulsed violently, his small body racked with seizures. He slipped into a deep coma, his pulse weakening by the hour. The doctors prepared them for the worst. But his grandfather refused to give up. He sat by Amit's side, holding his frail hand, whispering prayers and telling him stories, just as he always had. Then, one evening, my friend saw her father in silent prayer, tears streaming down his face. He looked at her and said, "He will wake up tonight." There was certainty in his voice, an unsettling final certainty. That night, at exactly midnight, Amit gasped awake. His fever broke, his eyes alert. He smiled weakly and whispered. Grandpa kept the monsters away. Filled with relief, my friend called home to share the good news, only to hear her mother sobbing on the other end. "Your father, he passed away 2 hours ago." 2 hours ago, the exact moment Amit woke up. Amit survived, but he never forgot that night. He claimed he saw his grandfather standing between him and the dark figures, holding them back as they clawed for his soul. His grandfather had made a pact. He had traded his own life for Amit's. Amit is now a doctor, saving lives as his grandfather once saved his. But even today he refuses to sleep in total darkness, because sometimes in the shadows he still sees those hollow-eyed figures watching, waiting.
Story 5. Silent Screams of the Forgotten.
Although I'd experienced a few paranormal occurrences, I always kept an open mind. I did not completely dismiss the supernatural, but I believed many strange happenings had logical explanations. If ghosts existed, then there had to be a higher power as well. I always attributed open closets to drafts and creaking noises to the house settling. But one night changed everything. While living in Delhi, I received a distressing email from a friend of a friend. We had met briefly, but she was desperate for help. Her message was filled with fear. She believed she was either losing her mind or being haunted. Her husband dismissed her fears, but she was terrified and alone. She described waking up at 2 a.m., suffocating with an overwhelming sense of dread. Then she started seeing her, a woman with long, disheveled hair, her face hidden in darkness, standing by the bed. When she woke up, the figure would turn and vanish into the wall. Skeptical but curious, I agreed to stay the night. The woman looked exhausted when she greeted me. Her hands trembled and her eyes darted nervously. That night I closed all the blinds, convinced it was a trick of light. I lay in bed, waiting. At 2 a.m., a tingling sensation crept up my spine. I opened my eyes and froze. A woman stood at the foot of the bed, her long hair obscuring her face. My breath caught as she turned and walked straight into the cabinet. My heart pounded. The next night, I armed myself with a flashlight. As the ghost appeared, I shone the light on her face, only to see swirling darkness where features should have been. The figure let out a piercing scream and lunged toward me before vanishing into the wall. Terrified, I left with my friend until her husband returned. Upon my urging, he examined the cabinet. The wall was uneven, as if rebuilt. With a hammer, he broke through and uncovered a skeleton. The remains wore tattered clothing identical to the ghost's. The police confirmed the truth. 20 years ago, a woman had vanished from the house. Her husband had claimed she ran away, but she never left. She had been there all along, waiting to be found. That night, I learned that some ghosts do not haunt out of malice, they seek justice.
Story 6. The horror of a village possession.
For many, possession is something seen in movies, easily forgotten as mere fiction, but I know it is real. I have seen it. The dead can communicate, and sometimes they take control of the living. Let me share my experience, and you can decide for yourself if possession is true or just a cinematic creation. I always loved visiting my grandparents in the village. It was a peaceful rural place, surrounded by endless paddy fields. My cousins and I often played under the old peepal tree in the courtyard. One day, while playing there, we heard shouting and a chorus of voices. My uncle called for us to come quickly, so we rushed to see what was happening. Much of our family was gathered, with my father and uncle holding down the cow herder, my grandfather's worker. The herder was thrashing violently, his eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, his body bent in impossible angles, making us fear for his safety. His shouts were unintelligible, a mix of gibberish and strange sounds, sending chills down our spines. My uncle shouted for us to clear a cot, and we quickly moved it into the courtyard. It took several men to restrain the herder, tying him tightly with ropes to prevent him from attacking. Despite the restraint, he jerked and struggled fiercely, as though something was fighting to break free. Then suddenly, he went silent. His eyes returned to normal, but his gaze was distant, almost unrecognizable. "How did I get here?" he demanded, as if unaware of the scene unfolding around him. He spoke with a coldness that felt alien, and a voice that was not his own. "Untie me at once," he demanded, his demeanor changing from friendly to sinister. The man was no longer the cowherder we knew. His face was hardened, his eyes cold with malice. It was then that my uncle realized the herder was possessed. A malevolent spirit had taken control. My uncle began an exorcism, performing rituals and chanting verses, trying to expel the demon from the herder's body. The herder screamed and threatened us with unimaginable horrors, his voice distorted by rage. The exorcism reached its peak when my uncle recited a special mantra 121 times. The herder's body arched unnaturally, and with a final bone-chilling scream, he went limp. When he awoke, he was confused, disoriented, with no memory of the terrifying ordeal. It was only then that we learned the shocking truth. The spirit of a man who had died hours earlier had possessed him. I witnessed this with my own eyes, and the image of that possessed man has haunted my dreams ever since. You can't unsee such terror, and once you experience it, you begin to question everything you thought you knew about the supernatural.
Story 7. The Hand from the Grave.
I know that ghosts exist because I witnessed my cousin's terrifying reaction when he saw one. You don't see the wind, but you can see the leaves move in the breeze. I never saw the ghost, but I saw how it affected my cousin, and that's why I believe every child eagerly awaits the summer holidays. No school, no homework, just endless playtime. It was the best time of the year, not just because of the break, but because we would all gather at our grandmother's house in the Bhagapur district of Beckar. It was a spacious home with numerous rooms and a large open courtyard, perfect for playing hide and seek. My cousin Vikas was a year older than me, and I looked up to him. He was my role model, and I would follow him everywhere. Along with our other cousins, we would laugh and chase each other around the house. The only thing that scared us was the communal toilet, located near the graveyard. The graveyard lay just beyond our grandmother's property, with the graves jutting up from the ground. During the day, it seemed harmless, but at night it took on a sinister presence. The shadows stretched unnaturally, and the wind whispered through the trees, sounding like the cries of the dead. We were terrified to go to the toilet alone at night, so we would wake up others to go with us. There was also an old man who tended to the graveyard. We often saw him pulling weeds or removing dead flowers. He would watch our house with an unsettling intensity, especially when he looked at Vikas. One night, while Vikas was in the toilet, he saw the old man standing outside the window, staring at him with eerie focus. The next day, we noticed a single handprint on the toilet window, as if someone had pressed their hand through the glass. Vikas was trembling with fear, and that night, when he went back to use the toilet, he screamed. He claimed the old man's hand had appeared through the window, trying to grab him. Later that night, when Vikas returned to the toilet with another cousin, they both screamed again. This time, Vikas claimed the hand rose from the ground, grabbing his ankle as the window rattled. We had heard no rattling, but Vikas was almost hysterical. The adults dismissed it as a prank, but the fear in Vikas's eyes was unmistakable. 2 uncles went to the graveyard to confront the old man. They returned pale and shaken. They had found his house, but when they looked inside, they saw the old man lying on the ground, dead for some time. His arm was still raised, fingers curled as if reaching for someone's ankle. Vikas hadn't seen the old man. He had seen the ghost of the old man still haunting him. The ghost never appeared again after the old man was buried.
Story 8. Captured by the Dead.
A ghostly photograph that defied logic, capturing the image of a deceased person, became a sensation when it was first shared. Many notable physicists and natural philosophers believed they could explain the phenomenon, but some mysteries remain beyond even their reach. This is what happened. My friend Jones, an amateur photographer, used an old Sanderson camera, a Ross lens, and a Thornton Piccard shutter. On a fateful Sunday, Mr. Smith, a colleague, asked Jones to photograph his wife and sister-in-law. The wife's sister, who was married to Mr. Smith's older brother, had a chilling presence that set the stage for the eerie events. Jones set up the camera on the Smiths' veranda, and after several hours of adjusting the focus, he was ready. Everything seemed perfect. The photograph was taken, and Jones left, promising to return with the developed plate the next day. When he brought the photograph to the office, it caused an immediate stir. The image revealed 2 women sitting in cane chairs, nothing unusual except for the third figure standing behind them. It was a woman, her upper body visible, wearing a broad-edged tutu. What was most terrifying was that she was clearly not in the room during the photo session. She was out of focus, appearing faintly in the background. As Mr. Smith examined the photograph, His face turned pale. "That's my first wife," he whispered. "She died 8 years ago." He explained that before her death, she had wanted her photograph taken, sensing her impending fate. She never had the chance to fulfill that wish. The shock didn't end there. The woman in the photograph was wearing a necklace, one that Mr. Smith recognized. He had bought it for her years ago. The shock deepened when the photograph's details matched precisely what his wife had worn before her death. Smith was visibly shaken, and the sensation of the ghostly photograph spread through the office. Despite many requests, Jones refused to share copies, honoring Mr. Smith's wishes. The story made headlines, captivating both the scientific and supernatural communities. Later, a learned professor suggested a scientific explanation, claiming that the image might have been caused by some sort of physical imprint left by the deceased woman. But even he admitted that the occurrence was beyond his full understanding. No one, including Mr. Smith, could explain how his dead wife managed to return for one final photograph. Some believe her spirit was trapped in the space between the living and the dead, captured forever on film, defying the rules of life and death.
Story 9. Whispers of Black Hollow.
In the small, isolated town of Black Hollow, there was a house known for its dark past. The old manor, long abandoned, had a reputation for being haunted. It stood at the end of a desolate road, surrounded by overgrown weeds and twisted trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. Locals spoke of strange noises and eerie sightings, but no one dared to go near it, except for one curious young man named Thomas. One evening, driven by a mix of fascination and fear, Thomas decided to venture into the house. Armed with only a flashlight and his courage, he stepped through the broken front door, which creaked loudly as it opened, as though warning him to turn back. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, revealing the house's age and decay. As he walked deeper into the house, Thomas felt a chill in the air that seemed to freeze him to the bone. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional sound of creaking floorboards beneath his feet. He made his way to the staircase, but just as he placed his hand on the railing, he heard a faint whisper in his ear, "Leave." Startled, Thomas spun around, but there was no one there. His heart raced, and he tried to calm himself, dismissing the whisper as a trick of the wind. Yet, as he ascended the stairs, the atmosphere grew heavier. Each step felt as if it led him further into a dark abyss. Suddenly, a door slammed shut at the end of the hallway. Thomas froze, his breath catching in his throat. He cautiously approached the door, only to find it locked. As he turned to leave, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A shadowy figure standing in the doorway, staring at him with hollow eyes. Panicked, Thomas rushed to the exit, but the door refused to open. He could feel the presence closing in on him, the whispers growing louder, more frantic, desperate. He finally broke free and ran into the night, never daring to return to the house again. From that night on, no one saw Thomas again. The house, however, continued to stand, as if waiting for its next victim.
Story 10. Unseen Terror in the Basement.
When we moved into the old house, I never believed in ghosts or supernatural occurrences. It was just a place to call home. However, strange things began to happen shortly after we settled in. It started small, with objects disappearing or being moved to strange places. We'd search the house only to find the missing items in the most unusual spots, as if they had been deliberately placed there. At night, the house would come alive with eerie sounds. The walls would creak, and whispers would fill the air, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I could never pinpoint where the voices were coming from. My family, however, seemed oblivious to these occurrences. They thought I was just being paranoid, but I knew something was wrong. One evening, I heard heavy footsteps walking down the hallway. I quickly got out of bed and peeked into the hall. No one was there. I went downstairs to check the kitchen, and to my horror, I saw the shadow of a man standing by the window watching me, but there was no one around. A chill ran down my spine as I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping me inside. I could hear breathing behind me. My heart raced as I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. A shadowy figure stood in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing a deep, unnatural red. It had a sinister smile, almost as if it was enjoying my terror. Desperate to escape, I ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of furniture being dragged across the floor from upstairs. The house seemed to be alive, shifting and groaning under some unseen weight. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but the signal cut out. In that moment, I realized that no one could hear me. The next morning, I found a series of strange markings on the floor, symbols that I had never seen before. As I researched, I learned that the house had once been the site of a tragic event, a fire that claimed the lives of several people. Was the house still haunted by their souls, trapped in a cycle of torment? I moved out shortly after that night, but I could still feel the presence lingering in the house. And sometimes, when I pass by, I can still see a faint glow in the windows, a reminder that the house was never truly empty.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.